We'll just give it a minute for people to walk in. It's lovely to see friendly faces. Jeremy, you have a beard. And Donna, you don't remember me, I'm sure, but I had you as a visiting professor when I was a student. I was an old student and you're a young teacher.
I'm glad it didn't hurt your career.
Clearly not, and you made an impression.
It's good to see you again, Johanna.
Okay, so are we still moving? Not quite. I think we're pretty stable. So Catherine will let people in as we walk in. So, dear members of the international jury, I know we have several with us. Thank you, dear colleagues, dear students, of course, dear participants to this competition, dear winners, chers amis, mesdames, messieurs, Anin, Kwekwe, Tekwanon, Werantons, welcome to Montreal, bienvenue à l'Université McGill. On est ravis de vous avoir avec nous, même si c'est à distance. On aurait bien aimé vous accueillir dans la ville qui est en ce moment en fleurs, qui recommence à prendre vie. Ce sera pour un autre moment, but thank you for joining us. Most importantly, of course, welcome to the Baxter Family Competition on Federalism. But before I introduce the event, a couple of things. You will notice that we are actually running this on Zoom, makes sense, but we chose not to do it as a webinar. Because webinars are somewhat safer because you only hear the speakers, but I find them a little colder. I wanted to get a sense of community. So we're all in this together, but it means a little bit of discipline. So you're all muted and I will ask you to stay muted. Of course, when the speakers speak, you can always go at the top and at the right of your screen and have the person appear in full screen. That obviously will be more pleasant. We are also recording, so if you prefer not to be seen, of course, you keep your cameras closed, but you can open your cameras, and I will certainly ask you at the end to open as much as you can your cameras so that we can all be together, open our mics and clap, but we'll do that at the end. So thank you for staying muted at this stage. Before going any further, I'd just like to underline, of course, that McGill is situated on land which has long served at the site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. We honor, respect, and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples of the world connected to the various territories on which we gather, albeit virtually today. L'Université McGill est située sur un emplacement qui a longtemps servi de lieu de rencontre et d'échange entre les peuples autochtones, y compris les nations Haudenosaunee et Anishinaabe. Nous rendons hommage aux peuples autochtones du monde liés aux multiples territoires sur lesquels nous nous réunissons virtuellement aujourd'hui. Nous leur témoignons notre respect et notre reconnaissance. Miigwech, Niawel. Le concours de la famille Baxter a été lancé à la faculté de droit en 2017, en fait 2016, mais la première édition a eu lieu en 2017, lors des commémorations des 150 ans de la Fédération canadienne. Et je dis bien commémoration, pas célébration. C'était un moment de réflexion sur l'état de la Fédération. Et c'était l'un des événements phares pour notre faculté. The competition was launched through the generous financial support and foresight of two alumni of our faculty who join us today, and I'm so thrilled that you can be there, Rachel Baxter and Colin Baxter. Rachel will take the mic in a few minutes, and Colin will talk to us at the end. And Rachel will explain what their motivation was. But let me take 2 or 3 minutes, maybe less, I hope, to just explain what I had in mind when we launched this. I came back to McGill to hold a chair in federalism in 2015 after about 20 years in Europe. And then during those 20 years, sort of post fall of the wall, federalism was popular. It was popular as a potential means of conflict resolution in post-conflict societies. It was obviously one way in which we were trying to understand European integration. I was living in Belgium, so of course federalism was both the model and Belgium the counter model of working federalism. And then I came back here. I wasn't surprised that federalism had, if not a bad name, a completely insignificant name. Federalism was not popular. For the previous 30 years, bright young minds had turned their intellectual energy towards other issues of much importance. Of course, fundamental rights with the Charter, which took a lot of space in our academia. Transitional justice, Indigenous issues, LGBT rights, and so on and so forth. Of course, hugely important, but had sort of dismissed the more institutional, traditional study of constitutional law. Didn't seem as important or maybe as sexy, and federalism was part of that. And I felt this disconnect, and I remain, despite all their faults, a strong believer in strong institutions to help us better live together. So basically my objective was to rekindle, not sell federalism, but rekindle conversations about it. And this competition just came fantastically at the right time for this. So for the last 3 editions, we've received, I would say, over 67, oh no, more than that, because between 20 and 40, like 80 contributions from probably, I didn't count it this morning, but probably 35 countries in the world. This year, we had contributions from 12 countries to young people who think federalism, who take it apart, who use it as a prism to understand pluralism, who challenge policymaking, who compare countries. And of course, COVID has led to a lot of reflection about what the impact of federalism on fighting the pandemic, and vice versa, how meeting the pandemic has influenced power relations in federalism. So the competition for me is actually a huge success in that way, because it's bringing people from around the world to talk about things that we thought they didn't want to talk about, frankly, in Canada in a few years back. So wonderful. Thank you, Colin and Rachel, and thank you for all the participants. So just before I turn the mic to Rachel, just an explanation of how this is going to go. After Rachel speaks, we will hear Josiah and Kelty without questions, because we just want to move on. We'll take a short break so that we get, Zoom breathe, glass of water, and then we'll have the next 2 presentations and questions. Hopefully we'll have about 20 minutes of questions, which is probably too short, because I'm sure there'll be lots of want for debate. What we can do when we close this event, and we're aiming to close it really at 1 o'clock Montreal time, so in a bit less than 2 hours. Of course, if people want to hang out like we normally do at a conference, where we just hang out in the corridor or go out for a drink, if you want to hang out for a while, and you can, of course, you're more than welcome to do that and carry on the conversation. 2 words. I will thank people at the end, but there's a couple of people I really want to thank right now, apart from Colin and Rachel. The first one is Catherine Lapierre. Catherine, if you can just wave. Lapierre, I said Lapierre, sorry, Lapierre. Now, many of you will have seen Catherine's name. You'll have been in contact with her. She's the grand Manitou of all this. She's been managing the communications largely and all the logistics. And I could not do this without Catherine. So merci, 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 Catherine. I also want to thank the graphic artist, Lauriane Higgins, who did the wonderful poster that you've all received. Okay, so now I turn the mic to Rachel for a few words of introduction, and then we'll hear from our first prize winner, Josiah Wamwere. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Bonjour à tous. Colin and I are so glad to be part of this 3rd edition of the competition on federalism. We're very impressed by how international it has grown, with submissions from all over the world, and the winners this year from Kenya, Canada, France, Switzerland, and Germany. Our interest in starting this competition roughly 6 years ago was not into the details of federalism as Professor Poirier has lived, but from a more basic standpoint. As 2 lawyers, we were very interested in how government structures improve society. or have the potential to improve society, and how a well-crafted constitutional framework backed by respect for the rule of law can lead to more stable and just countries. Little did we know, the subsequent 4 years in the United States and the global pandemic underscored the importance of cooperative and successful federalism. In short, in challenging times, we rely on our governments. So we hope that this competition leads the younger generation of scholars and lawyers and leaders to think about how our countries operate and ways in which to make them better. We think these papers are good fuel for those streams of thought, and we're thrilled to see and read everything that has been submitted to this year's competition. We didn't do the heavy lifting, however, so I would like to thank our panel of judges. Je voudrais remercier le jury, who gave their time and expertise to ensure that the winning papers were of the highest quality. We were fortunate this year to have 2 judges return, who were also judges on the last edition's jury. They were kind enough or brave enough to return, but this also speaks, I think, to the quality of the submissions in this competition. They are the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Beverly McLaughlin, and Professor Francesco Palermo of the University of Verona's Faculty of Law. Also filling out this year's jury is Clément Gascon, the former Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Professor Nicola McEwen of the University of Edinburgh School of Social and Political Science, Professor Yasmin Abou-Laban, Professor of Political Science at the University of Alberta, Professor Nico Statler of the University of the Western Cape's Faculty of Law in South Africa, Professor Jacqueline Neo at the National University of Singapore's Faculty of Law. And we are fortunate to have with us also on the jury, the author of the winning paper of last year, the competition 2 years ago, John Natto, who is completing his internship at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. Many thanks to all of them for their dedication and hard work at reading these wonderful submissions. So without further ado, I turn it back over to who we're really here to hear today, are the authors of the winning papers. Thank you to all of you for your participation and your interest. It means a lot to us.
Merci beaucoup, Rachel. So again, without further ado, but I will still take a minute or two to introduce Josiah and Wamwere, who is the winner of this year's competition. You will all be probably impressed by the fact that the first prize comes from somebody who is not officially from a federal country. And actually 2 of the 4 prizes are, which is again, really counterintuitive, I think, for many of us in Canada. And I think a testimony of the importance of thinking about at least pluralism and how interconnected institutions must function. So Josiah is an LLB student at Riara University in Nairobi. He's set to graduate in just about 3 months. So congratulations and good luck in your final exams. I will not read all the details, but over the last few years, Josiah has just accumulated a number of essay prizes. He's won prizes that have taken him to London. He's won prizes that have been sponsored by the government of Korea. But on top of this, he's also sponsoring writing competitions for children, encouraging literacy and writing amongst young people of African descent. So congratulations on this. I will just turn the mic to you, Josiah, asking you again, if you can, to really respect the short time we've actually given you for your presentation on the utility of decentralized responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Congratulations to you, and take over the mic.
Thank you so much. Allow me to begin by conveying my thanks to the organizers of this competition. It was truly an enlightening experience for me. For me, a majority of it was, of course, learning. I had to learn because, as you have pointed out, Kenya is a non-federal country. So it was a learning process for me, and I appreciate this award. I also want to congratulate my co-laureate, Philip, Benoît, and Kelty. And let me begin by first maybe giving a summary of my paper. You will have noted that during the better part of 2020, there was so much debate going on about federalism, decentralization. We had a couple of papers coming out pointing out how a decentralized system of government will not be enough or is not sufficient to deal with this COVID-19 pandemic. And a majority of these papers that have been written, they painted a very discouraging picture about the utility of a decentralized response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so my paper basically tries to go on a journey and trying to understand how is this true? Yeah, is a decentralized response to the pandemic inefficient? That's one of the questions I was trying to answer in my paper. And perhaps another question I intended to answer with my paper is why is there this discouragement and this passion about federalism and decentralization in general in responding to the pandemic? So those were two of the questions that I intended to answer in my paper. And so of course, one of the papers that I came across and was quite interesting for me was one penned and or written by Professor Zaslow, who is a professor of law at UCLA. And the title of his paper was actually "Federalism is for Suckers." So that's just showing some of the discouragements that was being experienced globally about federalism in general. So another question maybe I can answer is, why did I choose Canada, USA, and Australia as my case studies? Of course, they usually say that it's better to compare apples with apples, yeah? So I was looking for federal countries at least that share maybe similarities. And you know, the problem with doing comparative analysis, I think maybe a majority of you may know, is that there's the urge to generalize among the comparative countries you might be doing. And at the end of the day, countries are different. Even if it's a federal country, it's still different. So I decided to select countries that have in the public health emergency response, the response is federally supported, but executed locally. So in those three countries, I think they share that trend. And I think last year, the pandemic has given us a very good opportunity to be able to compare response measures in all these federal countries, because previously, public health emergencies happened in a patchwork. Like you'd find Hurricane Katrina maybe in the USA, which is not happening maybe in Canada or where. So here we have pandemic that sort of levels the playing field, and we're able to make some good comparisons and some good analysis. So maybe that's a brief introduction about my paper. And so firstly, I can discuss how I discussed the impact of the pandemic on intergovernmental relations in Australia, in the USA, and in Canada. And when I was writing this paper, this was late last year, I think it was still too early to tell the real impact of this pandemic on federalism at large. And a number of commentators had some good comments to make about this. For example, in the US, we had Professor Kincaid and Lecron who noted that, and I'm quoting verbatim, the pandemic is unlikely to induce significant changes in the distribution of power in the American federal system. In Canada, we had André Lecoux, I hope I pronounced it rightly, and his colleagues, who I quote verbatim, "The decentralized and collaborative handling of the crisis has reduced concerns over abuses of power and has set a major precedent in terms of respecting provincial autonomy that may have rendered obsolete the Emergencies Act." In Australia, we had Roger Wilkins, who also notes that where there has been a marked increase in the federal government's role in crisis management, this has since been transformed into an area of shared responsibility between the Commonwealth and the states. So generally, we can see that the pandemic seems to have reaffirmed some of the basic understandings we had about limitation of national powers and advantages of decentralization. However, even with this reaffirmation, we still had some qualms, criticisms for the leaders of these three countries. We had President Trump, who faced a huge amount of criticism in how his government handled the pandemic. And if you remember well, during the early stages of the pandemic in the US, the former President Trump declared that the federal government has the power to actually deal with this pandemic. But then the next day, he came and changed his statement and noted that it's the governors who have power to deal with this pandemic. In Canada, I think the main issue has been the refusal of Prime Minister Trudeau to implement the Emergencies Act in 2020. So we also faced quite a good deal of criticism for he decided to leave pandemic management to the various leaders of the subnational governments. In Australia, also Prime Minister Scott Morrison also faced heavy criticism for not implementing the constitutional quarantine powers of the Commonwealth. And so at least at that level, we had some similar criticisms in all these federal countries in how they responded to the pandemic. So what factors influenced this push towards centralization? So this centralization urge, why is everybody, why were people discouraged about the utility of a decentralized response to the pandemic? And some of the factors that I outlined in my paper include, number one, the fear of disintegration. And I think this stems from the fact that I think one of the main and basic features that props up federalism in all these three countries is the confidence in the durability of the political system. And this confidence is what now permits this notion that we are same but different, and dissensus is allowed, and subnational governments are able to actually implement their own policies without the fear of the threat of preemption by the federal government. And if you track the history of federalism, especially in Canada and the US, you'll see that these countries have been beset previously by intense conflicts over rights issues, where we have like abortion and gun ownership. And many of these right-based conflicts in the Canada and the US especially are regionally based. So this pandemic came and sort of added coal to the burning fire. And this resulted in a sense of political fragility because as it was clear, states and provinces adopted different policies in responding to this pandemic. In the USA, this came out quite clearly in the USA, where we saw sharp partisan division among both political leaders and citizens in responding to this pandemic. We had red states, for example, those states aligned with the Republican Party, supporting intense and Democratic Party was supporting intense, longer, and more draconian stay-at-home orders. So for the Democratic Party in the USA, states aligned to the Democratic Party, they were insisting on handling this pandemic seriously and implementing these draconian policies, if you can call them that. Red states, on the other hand, that's those one affiliated with the Republican Party, were of the view that we need to open up the economy, that these lockdowns are affecting our economy. So for the Republican Party, the economy was a very big priority for them, maybe more than even responding to the pandemic itself. In Canada, this variety in response measures was observed even in contact tracing and the rate of testing, which was differing across the provinces. That's if you look, for example, with Alberta, British Columbia, and Quebec were testing and tracing at higher rates than the other provinces. However, unlike the USA, where this variety in response measures was as a result of partisanship, in Canada, there is a strong sense of regional sovereignty. So that one is what contributed to these disparities in response measures. So this variety can be seen as a potential threat because of the increased mobility across states and provinces. Because if one state or province has this policy and the next state or province has another policy, then a movement across borders will become a potential threat. So so far, I think even up to date, these tensions have not led to any authoritative national resolutions by any branch of government. And we have seen this in previous public health emergencies. For example, in the US of A, where after Hurricane Katrina, for example, the federal government moved in and I think, if I'm not wrong, it was President George Bush who was president then. And he came in and the federal government took up a larger responsibility in responding to that public health emergency. But right now, at the moment, I don't think we have seen this so much in any of these three countries, but the clamors are still there. There's still tension. There's still much tension going on. So that's fear of disintegration. Secondly, we have another contributing factor to this centralization thesis is an exuberant perfectionism. And another critical disposition actually that props up federalism in all these three countries is the capacity to appreciate variety. Because, of course, different jurisdictions can be expected to give expression to different priorities. So while these attractions for variety are quite obvious, they may seem obvious, this appreciation runs up another powerful trait, and that's an exuberant perfectionism. You want things to work out perfectly. So, and the perfectionist impulse, as I was calling it, is actually becomes more powerful when matters of public health are concerned, as this constant phrase, one death is too many tests. So so now this perfectionist impulse is likely to become even especially stronger and widespread in the coming days, and it's a compelling driver of the demands towards decentralization. So lastly, another critical factor that I discussed that contributed to this centralization clamor is unaccountable local government action. And so another critical prop up for federalism in all these political systems is the capacity for divided loyalties. So national ties, allegiances to local regions and governments, they're all familiar. And you know, I have a friend who stays in Australia, and we were discussing this, and he was telling me that you'd find, for example, a person living in one state, for example, will definitely not know the premier of another state, but will definitely know the prime minister, who's Scott Morrison. So such natural ties and the extent of these locally imposed lockdowns has raised a whole new considerations on this concept. And the argument that state province-based governmental structures and regulatory powers will serve as a basis for divided and limited loyalties assumes what must have been self-evident to the proponents of federalism, that citizens would be free to pursue their own interests and dreams unless restrained by the actions of a government exercising powers derived from legislative authorization.
Josiah, sorry to interrupt. I will ask you to bring this to a conclusion within 2 minutes, if it's possible. Sorry to rush you.
Pardon me? Sorry?
I will ask you to bring your presentation to a conclusion within 2 minutes, if it's possible.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So anyway, that was the last, I think, critical factor that was bringing these clamors up. So lastly, in my paper, I discussed some of the benefits of a decentralized response to this, to the pandemic. And of course, it was still too early to tell. That's a very important caveat that I noted in my paper, because it was still too early and it's difficult to actually tell the benefits of such a decentralized response. But one important, I think, a benefit that I came across was, number one, Australia, Canada, and the US resisted the centralization option legitimately, meaning that in the US, I think President Trump faced harsh criticism, and he even fell back on his assertion that the federal government has more power, has full authority to deal with the pandemic. But if you look at, for example, the Public Health Service Act, it actually provides the Surgeon General with the powers to actually deal with the public health emergency. And in Canada, the same, the Emergencies the Act also gives the Prime Minister these powers. And in Australia, the same, it's in the Constitution. So you'd find that in all these countries, they resisted this option legitimately. It was not a question of unlawful unlawful exercise of power. So why is a decentralized response to the coronavirus pandemic important? Number one is because such a public health emergency is a situation where there is perverse uncertainty. And so decentralization is a good response when you're not sure about what to do. And so, and this pandemic presents policymakers with certain known unknowns, to quote Donald Rumsfeld, the former Defense Secretary of the US. So the first uncertainty is uncertainty about the health impacts themselves. The second is uncertainty about trade-offs. And then finally, there's uncertainty about how to weigh the trade-offs. So faced with all this uncertainty, so a decentralized response would be good, so that at least you can try different things in different states or provinces. So what important things did the federal governments take the lead on, for example? And this makes sense if you think about federalism in a traditional sense. So economic relief and stimulus.
Sorry, Josiah. Yeah? I will really ask you to wrap this up, because we need to make space for other people. So you actually gave us quite a good, conclusion about what the potential, at least, of federalism for this. But just take 1 minute, wrap this up. But I'm sorry, this seems so impolite to have important guests from so far away and cut you off. But we really need to do this. Thank you.
So I think basically at the end of the day, what we can, I think we can conclude is that whether due to an abdication of responsibility by the federal government or constitutional or by constitutional design, I think the subnational governments in all these countries were left with a big burden of designing and implementing various response policies to the pandemic. And I think this pandemic provided a very good laboratory for institutional innovation of this great experiment of federalism. And I think, allow me to stop there because of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And this is such an important, interesting message, and I'm sure this will generate lots of conversation later, because the idea that federalism is messy and is leading to chaotic, hard to reconcile, contradictory responses is probably the leading thought right now around where we are. But the fact that federalism has this potential for innovation and basically test driving ideas in the context of uncertainty is certainly a very strong idea, and an idea that obviously you defended extremely well in this paper that won the first prize. So thank you very much and congratulations. We'll now turn to Kelty McKerracher from the University of Victoria. Kelty is part of the very first cohort of the first JDGID joint degree. So it's, for those of you who are not from here, it's a complete innovation of a joint degree in the common law and in Indigenous legal traditions and Indigenous legal orders taught simultaneously and in integrated fashion. I really wish I could still be a student and go back and partake in this program. Prior to attending law school, Kelty was, I don't know if you were a social worker, but you certainly worked with very vulnerable people in the downtown East Side in harm reduction. It's a very difficult area of Vancouver. So working with inner city people, and we don't have to go into this, but you know, Kelty, how much federalism was an issue in downtown East Side. We teach it every year in our faculties. She has a background in dance, so a hugely well-rounded person in community engaged art. So I hope we get a chance at some point to also discover those talents. She's completed a master's degree in expressive arts therapy at the European Graduate School in Switzerland. She's currently clerking with a law firm in the West, working on Indigenous issues. Kelty is presenting a paper entitled Relational Legal Pluralism and Indigenous Legal Orders in Canada. And this shows, I think, something quite important again about our competition is, for some people anyway, a very broad definition of federalism. It makes a lot of sense for those within to talk about pluralism and Indigenous legal orders through a federal lens, but it's not something that is really understood from a comparative perspective. So I'm just thrilled that it's actually coming out in this international context. Congratulations, Kelty, and the mic is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And a real honor. So I want to thank the McGill Chair in Federalism and the Baxter family and the distinguished jury members for the recognition. And congratulations to all of the other authors as well. I want to acknowledge the territories that I'm coming from today, the territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples, where the University of Victoria and the City of Victoria are built and where I live, and whose relationships with our land continue to this day. So I'd like to begin with a quote, and I owe it to Professor Aaron Mills of McGill, who I believe is here. It's from his article, What is a Treaty? On Contract and Mutual Aid, which is an article that formed the basis for much of my thinking in the paper. And in the article, Dr. Mills quotes Gary Potts, former chief of the Teme Augama Anishinaabe, who says this: "I remember once coming across an old white pine that had fallen in the forest. In its decayed roots, a young birch and a young black spruce were growing, healthy and strong. The pine was returning to the earth, and two totally different species were growing out of the common earth that was forming. And none was offended in the least by the presence of the others because their own identities were intact." So this image has become one that I carry with me in my studies, and Mills uses it to share Anishinaabe constitutionalism and to describe our interrelatedness and our uniqueness in what he calls intersocietal, mutually constituting political community on Turtle Island. And so the idea that my paper explores is that in a space of legal pluralism, which we are in Canada, legal orders are also mutually constituting. And this is an important aspect of how we might understand law in the territory of many nations of Canada. So before I talk about our mutuality, though, I want to speak a bit about Indigenous legal orders in their own right. I get the privilege to study and to learn from Indigenous law, Indigenous legal traditions, because Indigenous peoples have maintained and protected and adapted their systems of law and governance over the past 150 years of Canada's attempts to destroy them. And I just, you know, when Rachel Baxter, in your opening comments, you said, in challenging times, we depend on our governments, and I couldn't agree more. And so I think in a space of talking about federalism and Canadian federalism, it's important to acknowledge that Indigenous peoples have been prevented from relying on their governments, on their distinct governance structures, and that the structure of Canadian federalism has largely excluded Indigenous peoples from the tradition of cooperative federalism that we have here. So, you know, despite this project of Canada, Indigenous peoples have not only maintained their legal orders, and they've not only survived, but they're experiencing a massive resurgence as Indigenous peoples revitalize their law and governance systems across their territories. So the privilege of being part of the JD Joint Degree Program is to learn from this resurgence, and also to learn from some of the leading thinkers in this field from an academic standpoint. So Dr. Val Napoleon, Dr. John Burroughs, and Dr. Jeremy Weber, who's also here today. And they have really given us as students an intellectual foundation to be able to think plurally and transsystemically across legal orders, and not just across legal orders, but across legal orders that spring from different normative worlds that are not state-based. So we were challenged from our first day of law school to think about what law is and the work that law does in our societies, and to see the legal reasoning processes that may look different than what we're used to. And in this process of studying diverse legal orders in different areas, such as Gitxsan property and landholding, Anishinaabe constitutionalism, Cree responses to harm, Coast Salish laws of involuntary obligation, I've really come to see that there is nothing universal or inevitable about a state-based centralized system of law as a way of resolving conflicts and having democracy, and that Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island have always had and continue to have law and distinct ways of doing these things, and legal orders that are discursive and relational rather than legislative, and that are expressed through decentralized and often complex kinship-based governance structures. And of course, I'm oversimplifying for the purpose of the presentation, because every Indigenous legal order is distinct. There is no one Indigenous law. So I start by saying this because I think we have a challenge as scholars and practitioners of law and federalism to try and decolonize our thinking, and to disrupt our view of the supremacy of a state-based system of law as a way of ordering our society. And to do the intellectual work, as Dr. Napoleon would say, of being able to recognize law across difference. And at that point, we have the possibility of building reciprocal legal relationships with each other. So my paper starts from this premise that Indigenous peoples have law and that Canada is multi-juridical, and tries to respond to the question that everyone is asking: how will these systems of law interact, state and non-state? And how can their interaction deal with the inequity and the power imbalance that exists between them? Because it's not enough to talk about the formal equality of legal systems in a context of ongoing settler colonialism and state suppression of Indigenous law and governance, which is still happening today. So in that context, what role should recognition play in this relationship? Because recognition can be used in different ways. The author Audra Simpson, an ethnologist Audra Simpson, writes about recognition as the gift of the multicultural state. So affording a certain level of decision-making autonomy and recognition to groups that demonstrate their difference in acceptable terms. And this kind of unilateral recognition by the state allows it to administer difference while maintaining its normatively superior role and maintaining its role as the ultimate guarantor of rights and freedoms under the social contract. And this is what scholars have referred to as weak legal pluralism or societal pluralism under unitary law. But what about genuinely external legal and normative worlds, which is the situation between state law and Indigenous legal orders, whose difference is not a matter of internal differentiation within the social contract, but something quite different. And the state, I argue, is trying to manage this difference and manage Indigenous legal orders by recognizing them in a way that's consistent with liberalism and using different strategies of accommodation to do so, which I adapt from the work of Ralph Michaels in my paper, A Comparative Scholar. But I won't get deeply into them, just to give the example of legislation that purports to grant a delegated legal authority to Indigenous peoples to self-govern in different areas, when in fact, the legal authority of Indigenous peoples comes from their unique legal and constitutional orders. And in fact, our Constitution in Canada recognizes this. Although it's not given the expression and perhaps we haven't been brave enough to understand the true meaning of what that is. So the important point, I think, is that strong legal pluralism or decolonized legal pluralism is not consistent with colonial recognition. And that Indigenous legal orders can't be managed and administered by the state this way because they're not derived from rights originating within the social contract. They're not distributed by the state that way, the way that we think of rights, nor are they a form of private law that can be contracted into. They are in fact alternate forms of public law in Canada. So to borrow the concept of the pluriverse, which has been helpful in my thinking on this, Canada is a pluriverse of externally differentiated legal and normative worlds that are interrelated and interdependent. And this interrelation requires a different kind of recognition, a reciprocal recognition. So this is where the work of Ralph Michaels on relational legal pluralism becomes very exciting to me. Michaels expands on Hart's legal theory of primary and secondary rules as elements of law. So briefly, primary rules are foundational rules of obligation or duty or the content. And secondary rules are rules of internal recognition or rules by which the primary rules can be legitimately changed and recognized as authoritative. So within Hart's theory, a legal order that has both primary and secondary rules is factually law. But Michaels argues that in a context where there are multiple normative orders, a sequence which first identifies what counts as law and then asks how that system of law will interact with other systems of law doesn't grasp the reality of legal pluralism. So he argues that in a legally plural space, legal orders mutually constitute each other through external recognition or tertiary rules, which are also necessary to make a legal order complete. So one of the main arguments that I'm making in my paper is just elucidating this distinction between colonial recognition by the state on the one hand and external recognition as a mutually constitutive element of law on the other. And that's where I read a resonance with Dr. Mill's discussion of intersocietal, mutually constituting political community that always already exists on Turtle Island. So, you know, in this relational view, we don't relate to each other through a contract, but through a relationship that we live and continually renew, where our constitutional and legal orders shape and are reshaped by each other. So it's important to note that these tertiary rules, or they're also called linkage rules that enable legal orders to communicate, are coming from within each legal order. Okay, they're not externally imposed. And I think that, that they have the potential to be a part of self-determination and a part of Indigenous legal orders reconstituting themselves, because each legal order is determining its interaction with other systems of law on its own terms. And so they can be assertions of Indigenous legality that disrupt this colonial recognition, as well as contributing to the legitimate building of relationships between state and Indigenous legal orders and among Indigenous legal orders. And I give a brief example in my paper that looks at an early treaty between the Anishinaabe and the British, in which the Anishinaabe used the concept of fictive kin to establish legal relations with the British. Because within the Anishinaabe legal tradition, in order to create a legal relationship, there has to be a kin relationship. And this was recognized by the British and reciprocated. So I suggest that the practice of fictive kin is a linkage rule or a tertiary rule within Anishinaabe law that at that time was part of what constituted it as a legal order capable of interacting with other legal orders. So, you know, I think in what I've studied from Indigenous legal orders and seen in practice is that Indigenous legal orders have this capacity. I'm not entirely sure that Canadian law does. You know, going back to the metaphor of the different species of tree, none of whom are offended by the presence of the others because their own identity is intact. What is it in me that allows me to recognize you as a distinct person, as a distinct people? And if I can't do that, if I have to make you a part of me in order to recognize you, then what is lacking in my identity? If the Canadian legal system can't recognize Indigenous legal orders as truly distinct, and if it lacks this tertiary capacity to interact with them externally, then arguably, according to Michaels, it's incomplete as law because it can't deal with the reality of legal pluralism. So Canadian law can really learn from Indigenous legal orders in this regard, because Indigenous legal orders have tens of thousands of years since time out of mind, navigating a legally plural reality here. Theirs is the original intersocietal political community. And that brings me to conclude to the insight of the former Chief Justice of British Columbia, the Honorable Lance Finch, who Professor Mills also cites in his paper, who said that the work of Canadian law is not about trying to find the place for Indigenous legal orders within Canadian law. It's about Canadian law seeking its place within the legally plural landscape that exists here. And accordingly, the work of Canadian federalism is to find its place within the mutually constituting political community here that exists in this place. So I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelty. This is such a thought-provoking, out-of-the-box contribution to comparative federalism. I know that you're talking to and with scholarship, and you're developing it within that context. And you're taking it somewhere, opening that door for people who outside and inside, who've never thought about this before, who don't think federalism is that, who don't think pluralism is that, who don't think that the balance between autonomy and interrelation can accommodate that much difference. And I think your generation and the forthcoming have such a huge challenge in helping us rethink law and rethink how we relate to one another. And this is really just a fantastic contribution. And it was recognized, think of this, by an international jury who probably many of whom didn't know much about Indigenous reality in Canada. So I think it's just, again, a testimony to the quality of the communication that you've made. So thank you very, very much, and congratulations. Okay, as I announced earlier, I think we're just going to take like literally a 2.5-minute break. Just close our cameras, have a glass of water, breathe, give yourself a pat on the back for those two of you who've made your brilliant presentations, and the two coming to get ready. Okay, thank you. À tout de suite. Ok, je pense qu'on va recommencer. Alors, on va recommencer en entendant le troisième lauréat, le lauréat du troisième prix, Benoît Delerue. Benoît est un doctorant à l'Université de Lyon en sciences politiques, and this allows me to underline for the first time we opened this competition to political science, and we had members of the jury who were political scientists, and I think this was obviously a good decision because we have a winner who is from political science and was able to have this crossover. The reason we hadn't done it before, to be frank, was because political scientists had carried on writing about federalism for the last 30 years. My sense was lawyers had dropped it. So we wanted to make sure lawyers were coming back into the fray, but I think that's happening. Benoît is writing a thesis on the sovereignty of federated entities. Now, again, in Canada, this would not raise any eyebrows. You know, how independent and the fact that sovereignty can be divided and so on is not really an issue. Writing this in France is probably quite revolutionary. Alors, vous êtes pas mal courageux et on a très hâte de lire vos travaux qui comparent les souverainetés résiduelles des États fédérés aux États-Unis, au Canada et au Brésil. Vous avez eu l'occasion de faire du travail empirique dans tous ces pays, alors ça devait être franchement très, très enrichissant. Encore une fois, on vous envie. Vous avez aussi réalisé un stage à l'Assemblée parlementaire législative du Texas. Ça devait être aussi une expérience assez formidable. And I know that you are planning to do a postdoc in Canada, so you will be more than welcome on our land when we can physically welcome you. But we're thrilled that you're thinking of doing this. So Benoît va présenter ses travaux. Il a préparé un PowerPoint bilingue pour nous aider, donc on le remercie beaucoup. Et le titre, I was told by someone important, saying, oh, that's a mouthful. Alors, je pense que le titre de votre présentation pourrait être un test pour ceux qui apprennent le français, parce que c'est vraiment très complexe, mais on va le comprendre. Le régime fédératif face au triptyque structure, conjoncture et fracture. Évolution structurelle des fédérations canadiennes et américaines, états-uniennes, sous l'effet des crises conjoncturelles et des fractures politiques. Alors voilà, vous allez nous digérer ça en 15 minutes. Merci beaucoup et bienvenue, Benoît.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la professeure. Est-ce que vous voyez mon PowerPoint? Oui, d'accord. Juste un petit instant. J'ai un petit... Voilà. Voilà, excusez-moi. Je vous remercie beaucoup et je voudrais d'abord débuter ma présentation en exprimant ma gratitude envers le jury international très prestigieux pour l'honneur qu'il me fait de recevoir ce prix et de présenter une partie de mes travaux aujourd'hui. Je voudrais remercier également la famille Baxter de cette opportunité et toute l'équipe de la chaire Peter McKell pour l'organisation absolument parfaite du concours et du symposium. Puis bien évidemment, féliciter les collègues également primés aujourd'hui. Mon article s'intéresse à l'évolution des structures fédératives sous l'effet autant des phénomènes critiques que des tensions émanant du jeu politique traditionnel. Alors l'objectif, il est de mettre en corrélation le fédéralisme en tant que mode d'organisation verticalement divisé avec les turbulences et l'exploitation politique de celle-ci, permise par le pluralisme politique intrinsèque autant au régime démocratique qu'au régime fédéraliste. Alors, ce que j'ai appelé le triptyque, structure-conjoncture-fracture, suppose une évolutivité du paradigme fédératif, ce que, au fond, les pères fondateurs américains avaient déjà envisagé, notamment James Madison, qui présupposait que les temps de prospérité devaient bénéficier à l'action de l'État fédéré, tandis que les temps de turbulence réclamaient une action virulente de la part de l'État fédéral. Alors, mon article tente de questionner la stabilité systémique du fédéralisme, potentiellement mise à mal par la combinaison de ces trois facteurs, relatifs donc à une structure fédérative permissive, autant notamment du fait des normes constitutionnelles de division de la souveraineté, une conjoncture critique et une fracture politique occasionnant un pluralisme des doctrines. La thèse, c'est que ce triptyque est capable de faire évoluer un système, voire de le stabiliser in fine, du fait de l'avènement du fédéralisme coopératif. Je vais y revenir. Alors, pour prouver cette thèse par le fait historique, on peut diviser l'histoire des États-Unis et du Canada selon l'évolution de leur doctrine fédéraliste, avec une première phase de la fin de la décennie 1860, correspondant en fait au début de la reconstruction post-bellum aux États-Unis, et puis au début du pacte fédératif au Canada en 1867, jusqu'à la crise économique de 1929. Alors, pendant cette période, on va assister à une consolidation structurelle des deux fédérations par l'action d'un gouvernement fédéral fort. En fait, les raisons sont ici endogènes. La deuxième phase, elle va être causée par la survenue de causes majoritairement exogènes, c'est-à-dire la Grande Dépression, qui est mondiale, et puis ensuite le péril guerrier des deux guerres mondiales. Alors, ces événements vont révéler autant l'incapacité des États fédérés de répondre aux difficultés sociales et économiques de la crise de 29, du moins pas assez efficacement, que de la nécessité pour le gouvernement fédéral de miser sur la high politique, c'est-à-dire la haute politique en raison de l'effort de guerre. Il faut en fait, à cette époque, assurer la défense de toute l'Union, garantir la paix, ce qui concorde au fond avec la citation de Madison que je rapportais tantôt. La troisième phase, ensuite, c'est une fois la guerre achevée, on va nécessairement avoir un recentrage sur la low politics, donc la base politique, parce qu'à partir des années 60, d'une part, on est en plein milieu des Trente Glorieuses et l'État-providence est ancré, où il s'installe en tout cas bien concrètement, et puis d'autre part, parce qu'il y a des circonstances endogènes qui vont surpasser les menaces exogènes de la guerre, c'est-à-dire que du côté canadien, on a bien évidemment le début de la Révolution tranquille qui aura un impact aussi bien national que pan-national, et puis au sud, on a aussi le mouvement des droits civiques qui est en marche. Donc au fond, la question sociétale et même au fond identitaire est une donnée, une variable importante pour étudier, je pense, cette période. Il faut donc corréler au fond la montée des revendications locales ou provinciales avec une nécessité de poursuivre l'interventionnisme fédéral avec deux issues possibles. Au fond, soit le conflit intergouvernemental, soit la coopération, et je dirais même qu'au fond, les deux options ne sont pas mutuellement exclusives. Alors, je fonde mes recherches principalement sur les perceptions politiques, parce que je pense qu'elles sont justement utiles pour déterminer une fin à cette troisième période. Parce qu'il ne s'agit pas d'établir une date précise ou une rupture absolument brusque, mais on peut prendre assez facilement les administrations Pierre-Éliott Trudeau et Ronald Reagan comme finalité à cette troisième phase, entendu que ces deux gouvernements ont marqué une volonté politique de rupture, ou en tout cas perçue comme telle, avec au nord, bien évidemment, les revendications nationales québécoises centrifuges, ce qui passera par une ambition de remettre l'État fédéral au cœur du projet pan-canadien. Et puis au sud, l'administration Reagan va chercher à redorer les valeurs traditionnelles états-uniennes qui sont fondées politiquement, en tout cas, sur la subsidiarité, qui est un principe fédératif, l'autonomie locale, et puis la délégation des pouvoirs en vertu du 10e amendement. Et en fait, c'est un peu l'avènement de néo-fédéralisme étroitement lié à de nouvelles visions du patriotisme et pourquoi pas, métaphoriquement, l'avènement de contre-révolution. Donc, c'est sur ce découpage de l'histoire que j'ai tenté de bâtir mon article. Sur le plan méthodologique, j'ai cherché à mobiliser les archives gouvernementales parce que les collections offrent en fait une excellente rétrospective sur les perceptions politiques de l'époque, les ressentis élitistes au fond, qui sont nécessairement subjectifs. Pour résumer le plan de l'article, la première partie se concentre sur la montée en puissance de l'État fédéral, à la fois pour des raisons endogènes et exogènes. Donc, on a dans cette partie plutôt des faits objectifs. Dans un second temps, la deuxième partie de l'article discute davantage du réveil des sleeping giants, les géants endormis, pour reprendre une expression que l'on retrouve dans les documents d'archives, avec une vraie prise de conscience des États fédérés vis-à-vis de la poussée fédérale, mais aussi vis-à-vis de leurs propres échecs, ce qui fait qu'il y a une double donnée, à la fois de critique du fédéral et d'autocritique. Donc c'est plutôt une seconde partie fondée davantage sur la subjectivité des acteurs politiques. Alors pour la première période, on peut citer différents changements structurels majeurs. Donc il y a tout un nombre de programmes qui va contribuer à ces changements structurels. Et je les ai divisés ici, en tout cas pour mon PowerPoint, en 3 efforts, en 3 phases. D'abord, l'effort mis sur le développement des infrastructures, qui peut au fond être résumé par une volonté de mailler le sentiment pan-national en maillant le territoire. C'est-à-dire que du côté états-unien, alors outre les amendements de la reconstruction, qui visaient déjà à ramener dans le giron de l'Union les États rebelles, on va noter une vraie politique de construction des infrastructures ferroviaires, donc pendant le temps de la reconstruction, et l'objectif, et puis au-delà, l'objectif, ça sera d'unir physiquement toutes les parties du pays, et au fond, cet objectif avait déjà été amorcé pendant la guerre de sécession avec le Railroad Act de 1862, bien évidemment dans toute une continuité de développement des canaux fluviaux au début du siècle et de construction des infrastructures, bien évidemment, sur un vaste territoire qui faciliterait ainsi le commerce. Même objectif du côté canadien. Alors, on pense bien sûr aux promesses faites par le fédéral, autant aux promesses maritimes de construction d'un chemin de fer dans les années 1860 qu'à la Colombie-Britannique pour le Canadien Pacifique, concrétisé dans les années 1880. Et puis plus tard, il va y avoir une série de programmes, dont le Trans-Canada Highway Act de 1949, qui va annoncer une politique nationale d'aide et de coopération aux provinces. Le deuxième effort, donc déjà, le premier effort, il nécessite un budget fédéral conséquent. Le deuxième effort, ça va être celui d'accroître justement les budgets, mais particulièrement liés à la défense et à la sécurité du pays. Notamment du côté états-unien, on va fonder une doctrine sur 2 piliers. La force militaire, parce que je rappelle qu'on sort aussi de la guerre de sécession, en accordant d'importantes subventions fédérales à l'armée américaine, et puis en stimulant l'avancée technologique, ce qui impliquait donc une force universitaire en tant que deuxième pilier. Sur le plan structurel au long terme, l'impôt fédéral sur le revenu, qui était déjà institué en 1862 pour alimenter l'effort de guerre pendant la guerre de sécession, va devenir pérenne, avec en 1913 l'instauration du 16e amendement à la Constitution, et je préciserai même que cet amendement n'oblige pas l'État fédéral ensuite à redistribuer aux États. Au Canada, on dénote une même dynamique, les causes produisant les mêmes effets, je dirais, il faut des liquidités pour supporter l'effort de guerre, parce qu'on est au début du siècle dans la Première Guerre mondiale, et donc il faut des mesures en cas d'urgence. Je soulignerai 2 mesures, l'instauration bien sûr d'un impôt sur le revenu en 1917 sous le gouvernement Borden, mesure temporaire vouée, comme aux États-Unis d'ailleurs, à devenir pérenne, notamment sous l'effet de la Seconde Guerre mondiale, et puis la loi fédérale sur les mesures de guerre en 14, véritable mesure en cas de conjoncture critique dans cet arsenal législatif fédéral, soit d'ailleurs en temps de guerre qu'en temps de paix, comme en fit montre la crise d'octobre 70 au Québec. Alors l'avènement ensuite d'une conjoncture économique et sociale défavorable pendant la Grande Dépression va révéler la passivité ou l'inefficacité des États fédérés de répondre à une crise qui de toute façon dépasse les frontières même des États fédérés. Donc par conséquent, il va y avoir une nécessité de procéder à une restructuration fédérale sur le plan également social. Alors évidemment, on pense tout de suite au New Deal de Roosevelt, entériné pour la majeure partie par la Cour suprême. Et puis du côté canadien, c'est un peu la même chose avec la loi assurance chômage parmi d'autres mesures de 1935, recommandée dès 1919 par la Commission royale sur les relations industrielles, mais jugée anticonstitutionnelle par la Cour suprême du Canada en 1936 et le Conseil privé de Grande-Bretagne en 1937, ce qui fait que ça amène à une vraie restructuration structurelle, une vraie restructuration plutôt constitutionnelle en 1940 pour justement offrir au gouvernement fédéral la possibilité de légiférer dans ce champ de compétences traditionnellement provincial. Et puis ensuite viennent donc les années 60. Dans les années 60, les programmes fédéraux ne vont pas baisser, bien au contraire, ils vont augmenter. Donc, j'apporte des chiffres à l'appui dans l'article, mais disons que presque anecdotiquement, Washington sera même, du côté des États-Unis, forcé en 66 puis en 67 de créer un catalogue des programmes qu'ils proposent aux États, tellement ces programmes sont extrêmement importants, devenus très importants, à tel point que de 63 à 67, on va avoir plus de programmes fédéraux à l'intention des États qu'entre la guerre de sécession et les années 60. Donc, mais dans les années 60, il va y avoir malgré tout une ambition de mieux canaliser, de mieux orienter ces programmes fédéraux à l'attention des États fédérés dans un nouveau type de fédéralisme, désireux au fond de remettre les États fédérés au cœur du dispositif intergouvernemental, parce que c'est aussi une période où il y a une nouvelle génération de premiers ministres provinciaux et de gouverneurs qui vont faire entendre leur voix. Et c'est donc l'objet de la seconde partie de l'article, qui tente de mettre en évidence surtout les discours politiques de l'époque, reprochant notamment donc, un fossé entre les besoins grandissants au niveau des États et une manne financière plus importante au niveau fédéral, qui jouit, comme on l'a dit, du pouvoir de lever l'impôt, donc celui de le dépenser. Les élites vont également constater leurs propres failles structurelles, ce qui fait qu'à la critique du fédéral, il va y avoir aussi une autocritique, une prise de conscience, une sorte de diagnostic de l'absence d'une machine administrative ou de ministères, d'agences exécutives qui permettent justement de canaliser, de gérer ces programmes fédéraux. Et puis même du côté des États-Unis, on va avoir tout un mouvement, en particulier dans les années 70, de révision constitutionnelle, donc des constitutions des États fédérés, parce qu'elles sont vieillissantes, qu'elles datent pour la plupart de la reconstruction ou bien avant, et donc ne sont pas adéquates pour répondre aux défis du XXe siècle. Bref, la volonté politique, au fond, elle était là, mais les moyens, pas tant que ça. Alors, quel remède pour répondre à ces mots? Le fédéral, de son côté, il va répondre par le biais donc d'un nouveau type de fédéralisme, le fédéralisme coopératif. Et le principe, au fond, il est simple, consulter, discuter et négocier, autant que faire se peut, avec les décideurs locaux, plutôt que de décider arbitrairement sur la colline du Parlement ou sur Capitol Hill. C'est ce qui avait été, au fond, reproché par les élites au niveau des États. Alors, ça va constituer un vrai fédéralisme exécutif, caractérisé justement par la multiplication des rencontres intergouvernementales dans les années 60. Et puis, pour redémarrer, les États vont devoir légiférer pour gérer les flux de transferts fiscaux du fédéral, pour les identifier, ces programmes, ces subventions, tellement ils sont nombreux, et puis pour créer des agences pouvant justement gérer administrativement ces programmes. Ça va créer une vraie machine administrative à tel point qu'au fédéralisme exécutif, on peut parler d'un fédéralisme administratif qui faciliterait ainsi la mise en œuvre par les États de leurs pleines compétences. Alors ça ne pouvait au fond sans doute pas s'accompagner, ça ne pouvait pas aller sans s'accompagner d'une forme de big government à tous les étages, en plus de cette grande bureaucratie fédérale, pour reprendre les mots de René Lévesque. Alors en conclusion, mon article, il a cherché à démontrer, dans un premier temps, que la canalisation structurellement parlant par le fédéral des voies de résolution des crises, ces conjonctures critiques, résulte en fait d'une incapacité, d'une inefficacité ou du moins pas assez suffisante de la part des États de trouver des solutions, mais que l'expansion du fédéral a entraîné dans un second temps une réaction coercitive de la part des États, désireux de conserver leur part de compétences, leur part de souveraineté constitutionnelle. Donc c'est une véritable fracture entre un projet fédéral centripète et des projets locaux centrifuges, mais le produit final de cette configuration, au fond, c'est davantage d'interdépendance intergouvernementale. Donc je pense qu'on pourrait dire aussi que la fracture, c'est la multiplication des stratégies politiques qui sont permises par les structures fédératives de souveraineté plurielle, sur laquelle reposent les transformations structurelles. Donc là, il y a une double dimension à la structure, qui est à la fois celle d'un découpage gouvernemental et celle de transformation structurelle, transformation destinée donc à répondre à ces crises conjoncturelles. Donc, dernier point, tandis que les mesures temporaires se sont systématiquement muées au Canada comme aux États-Unis en mesures permanentes, du moins pour les grandes mesures, la multiplication des programmes fédéraux a provoqué une certaine dépendance fiscale, ou peut-être même une dépendance fiscale certaine des États à l'État fédéral. Mais au fond, l'affirmation politique des États fédérés qui a certes été d'abord timide, même si elle était existante même au début du siècle, du XXe siècle, a été beaucoup plus énergique dans les années 60, parce qu'aussi c'était la fin du péril guerrier, donc on pouvait recentrer sur justement la law politics. Et donc ça a forcé un repositionnement de la doctrine fédérale à la faveur d'une dépendance au fond idéologique de l'État fédéral aux États fédérés, fondée sur l'idée que le gouvernement fédéral est l'agent des États dont il ne peut usurper les responsabilités constitutionnelles. Et dans les archives gouvernementales, on retrouve dans les projets justement d'intensité variable, que ce soit autonomiste, antifédéraliste, voire même carrément séparatiste, cette idée justement de relation du gouvernement fédéral en tant qu'agent avec les États fédérés. Donc il y a la notion que, au fond, avec cette double dépendance bidirectionnelle, il y a un partenariat qui s'équilibre, partenariat interdépendant, fondé donc sur ces transferts fiscaux et cette confiance mutuelle. Et je pense que c'est au fond tout l'objectif du fédéralisme coopératif que de permettre cette communication et cette négociation entre les parties. Je vous remercie beaucoup pour votre attention.
Un grand merci et félicitations. C'est une comparaison très riche. Vous connaissez peut-être mon intérêt pour le fédéralisme coopératif et donc cette analyse politologique venant de l'extérieur me semble extrêmement porteuse et j'ai personnellement très hâte de suivre vos travaux et je trouve cette analyse vraiment particulièrement intéressante. Toutes les questions d'interdépendance, en fait, c'est de ça dont on parle toujours lorsqu'on aborde le fédéralisme, que ce soit sous un angle théorique, politologique, normatif. Quand on le déconstruit, quand on veut le rendre fonctionnel, quand on se rend compte qu'il n'est pas fonctionnel, en fait, c'est souvent là que ça achoppe et vous avez vraiment identifié les grandes tendances. Alors, félicitations et merci. Alors, on va tout de suite passer la parole à Philippe Renninger, et si je dois dire Renninger, si je le dis en suisse allemand, si je comprends bien. Philip is a researcher and academic assistant at the University of Lucerne. He will soon defend his PhD thesis in the co-tutelle between Lucerne and Freiburg on Chinese, Swiss, and German public and comparative law. This is very broad, so we'd like to test you at some point about all this, but for another day. You have a law degree, which took you in part to China for a year, where you learned, at least started to learn the Chinese language and Chinese law. And this clearly informed your paper for this competition. If we understand well, you have the luck of spending a full semester at Oxford right now as a researcher. So I hope you're enjoying that, and I hope you managed to make it there. And the paper is entitled Federalism Chinese Style, or How to Contain COVID-19 Through a Central Local Chess Game. So we started with federalism, with COVID, we're ending with COVID in a different context. And let's see if you come to similar positive conclusions as those of Josiah. The mic is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Can you see my presentation? Great. So, dear Mr. and Mrs. Baxter, dear Professor Poirier, dear jury of the Baxter Family Competition, dear laureates, and dear everybody in the audience, I'm very happy to be part of this symposium. Today, I will present the topic of Federalism Chinese Style, or How to Contain COVID-19 through a central local chess game. Federalism and China, you might think. Indeed, China is quite a blank spot on the map of federalism studies. That's why I'm all the more grateful to have received an honorable mention at this competition. So several scholars in Chinese studies suggest a federalism Chinese style with so-called Chinese characteristics. However, they ignore that China is federal only in the economic and de facto sense of a fiscal federalism. In a de jure sense, in contrast, China is not federal, but rather the world's largest unitary state. The law grants statehood only to the central national level. And political doctrine rejects federalism as one of the so-called 5 taboos. First, China follows the principle of democratic centralism. Inside the state, all local state organs are held accountable toward higher state levels and ultimately the state center. Inside the ruling Communist Party, the CCP, too, local party branches are subordinate to the party center. Even more important is the second principle. the all-embracing leadership of the party over the state. Local units must thus follow the unified leadership, command and coordination by the party and the state center. Consequently, Chinese cities do not enjoy self-government or home rule as in some Western countries. Moreover, cities are not conceptualized as municipalities or communes, but as political administrative units dispatched by the center to control the surrounding countryside. Therefore, most cities encompass extensive rural areas much larger than their urbanized core. Despite this anti-federalism, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that there can be a high degree of decentralization in Chinese governance. The leading ideology of Sino-Marxism requires both the central level regulations on cities and the local regulations by cities themselves to adapt to the local conditions. Still, Chinese cities had been ruled for decades through central stipulations that cut with one knife. In the coronavirus crisis, however, the center explicitly rejects this one-size-fits-all approach. Instead, Xi Jinping commands to treat the whole country as a chess game. Such COVID-19 chess requires local differentiation, but arranged and commanded by the center. My presentation will closely follow the chess metaphor for explaining central local COVID-19 management in the pandemic's first epicenter, Wuhan city in Hubei province. So let's take a look at China's central local chessboard. Regarding public health emergencies like pandemics, the institutional framework is constructed parallelly on the national central level and on the local levels like, for example, Wuhan. The state organs in charge of PHE response belong to the quasi-executive branch in purple, just down at the bottom. Inside the government, the task is vested in the health administration, that is the health commission. For infectious diseases like COVID-19, the commission relies on the expertise of its specialized agency, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So on the central level, besides a new and very similar organ has been created last Thursday, like 3 days ago, the National Administration for Disease Control and Prevention. Moreover, be it on the central or the local level, the Health Commission houses the office of the Patriotic Sanitary Campaign Committee, which advises and coordinates sanitation-related work between the government's various departments. All state departments are equipped with party groups of the CCP, in green just on the lower right. So such party groups are the so-called leadership core of any state organ, making major decisions within them. Besides, there are separate party organs on every level, especially the party committees, in green on the upper left. So between the party and the state are the standing headquarters for emergency response in blue. Wuhan has created one overall emergency response commission, as well as a specialized comprehensive health emergency response commission. Wuhan also has staffed this headquarters with both government members and party cadres, making them mixed party state organs. In the coronavirus crisis, new ad hoc pieces were added to the chessboard. Here, there are important differences between the central and the local levels. On the central level, in the right upper half, there are separate ad hoc organs of the party and the state. A decisive role in the state's COVID-19 containment plays the State Council Joint Mechanism for COVID-19 Prevention and Control work in purple. It coordinates the work of the 32 departments of the State Council, that is the Chinese central government. But there is also a central level ad hoc institution of the party, the central leading group for COVID-19 work. It was established by the CCP Central Committee, and it's marked in green here. On the local level, just in the lower part, COVID-19 containment is mainly performed by one single ad hoc institution, Wuhan's headquarters for COVID-19 prevention and control in blue. Similar headquarters have been created in every city district of Wuhan, and there also exists a COVID-19 headquarters on the provincial level of Hubei, where Wuhan is located. So these ad hoc headquarters, again, are intermingled, mixed party state organs. As a result of this intermingling, central state organs lead and control local state organs in an indirect and informal manner. They do not use the official control channels of the state and its law, but rather the horizontal and vertical conduits of the party, the CCP. They perform 3 types of chess moves. First and regularly, central level leadership makes a triple move: horizontal, vertical, horizontal. So central state leaders act as CCP leaders horizontally in order to control the local party branch of Wuhan vertically. This local CCP branch then decisively influences the local state organs of Wuhan, again horizontally. Such a triple move introduced the second crucial COVID-19 phase or measure in Wuhan, the shutdown of the city. So on February 10, Wuhan's COVID-19 headquarters obliged all neighborhoods within the city to adopt a so-called closed management. However, despite this mass quarantine of residential compounds or even single buildings, the state center came to the conclusion that COVID-19 had not been sufficiently contained inside Wuhan. Therefore, acting as the party center, they removed and replaced the party secretaries of Wuhan and Hubei on February 13. The newly installed local party secretaries then ordered local state organs to immediately implement the party center's strict line on COVID-19. Only 1 day later, on February 14, Wuhan tightened the closed management to a real curfew for the vast majority of individuals. Nobody could exit or enter any residence except for 2 groups of persons: COVID-19 suspects obliged to go to hospitals or quarantine centers, and staff working in pandemic prevention or in essential sectors. Secondly, this chain of command is often reduced to a double move: horizontal, vertical. Central state leaders again act as CCP leaders horizontally, but they now directly command Wuhan's local organs responsible for pandemic management vertically. The party center issues direct orders to both the local state organs of Wuhan and to Wuhan's mixed party state COVID-19 headquarters. Such a double move led to the first crucial COVID-19 measure, the lockdown of Wuhan. Originally, the city on January 21st had only planned soft measures like cancelling mass events and promoting hand washing. In the eyes of the central level, this obviously was not strict enough. Therefore, on January 22, central level party and state representative Sun Chunlan undertook an inspection tour to Wuhan. She ordered local party and government cadres to first and foremost prevent the spread of the epidemic to other regions. Only 1 day later, on January 23, Wuhan's COVID-19 headquarters abruptly proclaimed the city's lockdown toward the outside. It forbade all persons in the city to leave Wuhan except for special reasons, and transportation from Wuhan was suspended too. However, the city had forgotten to regulate the opposite case to prohibit all persons outside the city from entering Wuhan. This was corrected on the very same day immediately by the national level Ministry of Transport. So this leads us to the next and last type of chess move. Thirdly, the state center can immediately act itself as state leaders in local affairs. This direct approach causes a single move vertically because the center's micromanagement must still be enforced by local organs. This move characterizes the stepwise and cautious easing of COVID-19 measures in Wuhan. For example, the lockdown has been gradually eased from the end of March. Originally, Wuhan's COVID-19 headquarters permitted individuals to enter or exit the city as early as February 24. However, the city was forced to revoke this permission on the very same day because of the lacking consent of leading comrades on the higher levels. Instead, the state center itself announced the concrete dates and conditions for entering and exiting Wuhan. First, they allowed only migrant workers to enter and exit the city. Migrant workers are workers from other parts of the country, but as late as March 25. The center then allowed other individuals to enter Wuhan from March 28 on, but only by train. Last but not least, from April 8, that is 2.5 months after the lockdown started, these individuals could enter Wuhan by other transportation means, as well as finally exit Wuhan. The latter single move illustrates that the state center reserves for itself, the state and party center reserves for itself the privilege of proclaiming the good news, easing Wuhan's lockdown and shutdown. In contrast, It burdens cities like Wuhan with conveying the bad news, imposing strict COVID-19 measures and enforcing them on the ground. On the one hand, this pattern demonstrates that local units like Wuhan serve as a pawn sacrifice, to speak in the language of the chess game. Central leaders take the credit when all is well, but they refuse to take the blame when things go badly. For example, only local level officials have been disciplined for failures in COVID-19 prevention. This further deteriorates Chinese citizens' confidence in the local levels, which is much lower than in central level authorities. Trust in China decreases vertically. The more local a unit, the less appreciated and trusted it is. On the other hand, COVID-19 chess shows that local units like Wuhan act as an agent of the central level. Wuhan thus bears huge responsibility for the COVID-19 management of the entire PRC. As Xi Jinping said, if Wuhan wins, Hubei wins. If Hubei wins, the province, the whole country wins. Failure is unacceptable. So being an agent means that cities shall not act as a representative defending their residents' interests. And most of all, Chinese cities are banned from acting as principals pursuing their self-defined local interests. Nevertheless, China's anti-federalism does not prevent its local units from actively acting on the local level. The reason is, neither is federal synonymous to decentralized nor unitary to centralized. So on the one hand, in unitary China, COVID-19 measures are decentralized in nature. Not only are they mostly issued by local units, but also do they vary heavily between those units. On the other hand, the praises of China's central local management overlook that COVID-19 containment not necessarily malfunctions in federal states. Some federations like Australia and initially, well, not now anymore, Germany, have done fairly well in managing COVID-19, precisely through their federal system. For reasons that time restrictions do not allow us to explain here in detail, federalism might even significantly enhance the substantial suitability of formally decentralized measures. It might thus contribute to local COVID-19 containment really adapting to local conditions and not merely following the chess playbook arranged by the center. Thanks for your attention.
Danke. Thank you very much for this presentation. So we're all waiting for the second season of the Queen's Gambit, taking China as the model. I don't play chess; it intimidates me to no end. But this is actually really quite spectacular, and again takes us where we're not expecting. You know, nobody thinks generally first stretch China. Centralized decentralization, and when you say federalism is not necessarily decentralized, unitary is not necessarily centralized, and you underline, actually you end where Josiah started, that there is potential benefit of federalism in facing complexity in a pandemic, but federalism is not the only answer. Federalism can be detrimental, and of course it's in a very complex context where other factors will change the course of, you know, taking Germany from the good example to what's going on, or the United States shifting between the time you wrote your papers. So it's actually, you know, it's a moving target, but what matters to me is that we're developing common conceptual vocabulary so that we can actually learn from each other through this. So this is wonderful. So I think now we'll just move on. Oops, we're just letting in our Dean. Welcome, Robert. You're just coming in right on time, and I thank him. I know he really wanted to be here to listen to everyone, but you can just imagine how difficult it is for Dean to accede to everybody's demand on a weekend. So thank you for joining us at this stage. I will first give the mic to Aaron Mills, not taking things in order, because Aaron, as some of you might know, had a baby not very long ago, 2 young children, and we're taking him away from his children on a Saturday morning. So he's agreed to stay, but I've asked him if he could ask his question first, so he can go back to his life. And then we'll give the voice primarily to members of the jury, and then open it if we have a bit of time. And as I said, we can hang out after. Aaron.
Bonjour, miigwech, bonjour and Denwe. Hello, my dear relatives. It's a real pleasure to be able to hear these presentations today, and of course, to have read Kelty's fabulous paper in more detail. And so maybe just a comment first. Of course, it's a real honor to have one's work engaged so seriously, and I want to commend Kelty for the approach taken. You know, it's exactly what I was taught as a law student, but probably didn't rise to in quite the way that Kelty has shown and modeled here, of sort of rigor and carefulness and thoughtfulness and charitability. And so, you know, I really want to commend you, Kelty, for having written a fantastic first-rate argument and approached scholarship in the way that you have. And I guess my question, I wonder if we can push your good idea further still. So I'm excited by the idea of linkage rules. And I think they give an elegant treatment of a certain way of thinking about Indigenous law, one which you've openly acknowledged owes a debt to heart. And so we would typically say positivist, but I think even more generally, we could say a way which thinks of law as propositional at core. And so in Hart's case, rules, but we might also give a nod to Dworkin and talk about legal principles, or of course, many other theorists, legal standards, ultimately legal values. Propositions, normative propositions. And so I think, you know, your paper has made a significant contribution with this idea of external recognition as a third order kind of rule. But I'm wondering if it might also have something to say about Indigenous law conceived of quite differently. So, you know, perhaps Hart got this part wrong. Perhaps, or he says Indigenous folks, you know, don't really have law because we just have primary rules. But what if that assessment, of course, is false? And we don't have, what about when elders talk about stories just as stories, or a song or a dance on its own terms, a petroform on its own terms, where we don't have to reduce it to a kind of proposition in order to see law? So elders' teachings, for instance. And I'm wondering if there's something about requiring the other to be able to recognize a couple formulations from your talk, different normative worlds, another one, genuinely external normative worlds. Is there anything in there that someone like me could use to push Canadian legal actors further to think about Indigenous law in this other sense that doesn't rely on heart in the same way, but where we sort of take elders or the earth as we find it and try to engage with law in the non-propositional way in which it's sometimes offered? So that's a huge question, and I'm just wondering if you have any preliminary thoughts on a starting place maybe, or whether there's any hope, or maybe I should just stop and say good enough that we can make this push in terms of heart. That would already be a massive step forward.
So Kelty, you must write a doctoral thesis in the next minute and a half.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think, honestly, I think the question, and thank you so much. I'm honored that you're here and that recognition and support that you've given in the treatment of your work. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I tried to do in my paper, and I didn't talk so much about this, but I looked at like these ideologies of liberalism and neoliberalism as like ways of understanding, as ontologies. And, you know, Hart is coming from a particular ontology. an idea of law, and we need different thinking, you know, and that's why I'm so appreciative of your work. The ontology that your work is coming from offers a different mode of thinking. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly how to address this. I think the professors in the JD program are really, that I've been most exposed to, are really trying and to present Indigenous legal orders in a way that doesn't reduce them to, like, yeah, these propositional modes. And I don't know, I don't have anything really brilliant to say, but I just, yeah, I do think that's the whole purpose, is not to collapse Indigenous legal orders into the structures of our thinking that maybe lose the different worlding.
So just a quick follow-up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Aaron, may I invite you to have the follow-up later, because we literally have 10 minutes to close the symposium.
I just wanted to say, yeah. I wouldn't have asked that question to just any student, but it was an exceptionally serious paper, and I thought it deserved a serious question. So miigwech.
And I'm sure you will carry on that conversation for all our benefit. Thank you very much, and sorry for cutting you, Aaron. We have several members of the jury on board, and Nico has a question for Josiah. Nico, are you with us? Nico Steitler, who is joining us in the evening, again on a Saturday evening from the Western Cape. Thank you, Nico.
Sorry, when you said we had a break, I poured myself a whiskey, so I'm very much in the spirit. First, congratulations on the winners. It was fantastic. You know, perhaps I was unenthusiastic about the competition, but as I read the papers, the high quality, it really became a real pleasure. So I really enjoyed it, and marvelous work that's done. Just on the question of Kenya, you said Kenya is not a federation. Most of us treat Kenya's devolution as being part of the family. And whether your remarks about Canada, Australia, and the US are not also applicable to Kenya. Thanks.
Yes, in Kenya, sorry. Yeah, in Kenya, what we have in Kenya is devolution, and devolution is our form of devolution. The central government has a quite strong pull and quite enormous powers than what we have here in Kenya, which are called counties. So, like during this pandemic, all policies concerning COVID-19 and coronavirus, they have been originating from the central government. And it's basically counties have very little functions when it comes to public health emergencies of the nature of coronavirus, for example. So as much as I can say, we have you can call it. Can you call it quasi-federal? I don't. Quasi-federal, yeah, yeah. So something like that, yeah, for sure.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. John, did you have a question? John Neto, who was the winner of the Baxter in the last edition, and who is a chess player.
Not a very good one. I will say that at the beginning, and I have to apologize for having joined a little late. I was having a connection problem here. I have a question for Philip on your presentation, and I really commend you for it. I really enjoyed how you emphasized, as Professor Poirier said, the federal does not equal decentralized, and singular does not mean centralized. I really appreciated your expose of the Chinese state and how it's reacted to the unitary Chinese state and how it's been able to react to the COVID-19 pandemic. Are there ways in which unitary states that are not one thing that I sort of observed in your presentation and having read your paper is a flexibility of mobilizing the instruments or establishing new instruments of the unitary state. Is there a way that multi-party unitary states might be able to transition from a default of centralized action to having decentralized action with a speed that China was able to, in your estimation? This is just a question I had stemming from your excellent presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a great question. I think China in this regard is really special because you have like the mechanisms established inside the party, and it's a one-party state. Well, officially it has 8 parties, but they are all like working together as bloc parties. So, I mean, there are other states which are officially unitary, maybe like the UK, that also has like strong parties like the Tories, who could like also maybe in terms of like provide some forum for decentralization through party structures. And what I also could think about is that in many states you originally had, like, for example, the church, which has parallel structures to the state administration. So, for example, in Germany, where I'm originally from, like the parishes of the church were equally important as the state parishes. So if there were things announced, they mostly went like through the church. So this would also provide a possible forum. But I mean, nowadays it probably is less important than it has been like 100 years or 200 years ago. But definitely is a great question, and I think that why could China react so quickly? It's definitely because they have these party structures. They have disciplinary mechanisms inside the party. So there's a disciplinary commission, and it's a party organ, and they will kind of send you to prison or enact other disciplinary measures, which should be like reserved for the state. But the real pressure is enacted through the party organs. True.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You see the time clicking. I've asked indulgence to have a few more minutes because we will have closing words, although brief, but there's still at least one question to be asked at this stage to Benoît. Dave, did you want to poser une question à Benoît? Dave Gennett is doing a postdoctorate with us at the law faculty. Merci.
Oui, merci Joanne. Bonjour tout le monde and congratulations to all for a winner. Oui, une question rapide pour Monsieur Delerue. J'ai beaucoup aimé votre présentation. Je trouvais que c'est très porteur le triptyque structure, conjoncture, fracture. Et je me suis posé la question, les cas que vous étudiez dans votre article sont les États-Unis et le Canada, donc des modèles agrégatifs, des systèmes fédéraux qui ont pris forme coming together. Je me demande si vous avez une opinion ou si vous pensez que ce triptyque-là pourrait servir pour analyser des systèmes fédéraux, les dynamiques fédérales dans des systèmes dissociatifs, un peu comme la Belgique ou encore comme les systèmes régionaux en Italie ou en Espagne.
Merci beaucoup pour votre question. En fait, c'est très intéressant parce que cette idée du triptyque, structure, conjoncture, fracture, n'est pas venue de ces deux études de cas-là. Dans ma thèse de doctorat, j'étudie le Canada et les États-Unis, et également le Brésil. Et en fait, c'est en étudiant le Brésil où je me suis rendu compte qu'il y avait une corrélation entre ces 3 facteurs, notamment en étudiant la première république des États-Unis du Brésil, de 1889 à 1930, qui au fond a fini par chuter à cause justement d'une structure, donc de sa structure constitutionnelle limitée des États-Unis, mais qui au fond permettait une autonomie des estados, des États, et donc finalement une anarchie. Il y avait aussi une conjoncture politique très oligarchique qui ne permettait pas de stabiliser le système, et puis une conjoncture économique, notamment, en tout cas, 1929, la crise économique qui a fini par accroître, si vous voulez, la crise du café qui avait déjà eu lieu depuis le début du siècle, parce que le Brésil était très dépendant de l'économie du café, et donc les prix ayant chuté, c'est toute l'économie au fond qui s'effondrait. Et finalement, il y a eu une succession d'événements politique, ensuite qui s'est enchaîné, en particulier, vraiment sur les 3 décennies, mais en particulier en 1929 et 1930, qui a amené à une véritable fracture politique, nationale, mais aussi entre élites au niveau des États, parce que c'était vraiment dominé par des oligarchies. Donc c'est à partir du cas brésilien en réalité que ce triptyque que j'ai commencé à étudier ce triptyque, et puis ensuite en étudiant le cas canadien et états-unien de manière comparée, mais sans volonté en fait d'établir un parallèle, je me suis rendu compte que de manière tout à fait différente, il y avait aussi la potentialité d'appliquer cette formule de manière tout à fait différente, parce qu'au fond, avec le cas états-unien et canadien, ce triptyque sert au contraire à améliorer les choses, à déboucher sur une interdépendance, sur un fédéralisme coopératif, et au fond, c'est plutôt positif, contrairement au cas brésilien où, au contraire, ça a été une chute totalement de la Première République. Pour ce qui est des autres fédérations, j'imagine que pour le coup, ça peut être généralisé, en tout cas, mais je les étudie pas suffisamment pour donner une idée plus exhaustive en fait de cette potentialité, mais pourquoi pas au fond, parce que la souveraineté en elle-même, elle a extrêmement évolué au cours de l'histoire. Ce n'est plus une souveraineté absolue au temps de Jean Baudin, donc voilà, on est vraiment dans une ère d'exercice responsable de l'autorité, que ce soit d'ailleurs dans les États fédéraux que dans les États unitaires également, qui ont une forte déconcentration de leur pouvoir également dans les États unitaires décentralisés, comme la France par exemple, et donc où il y a toujours une certaine tension entre le pluralisme qui est intrinsèque au fond à la démocratie et donc au régime fédéraliste, et puis les structures normatives, et au fond les conjonctures critiques qui touchent, et on voit bien avec la crise de la Covid, tous les pans de la société, tous les pans des structures, et donc incite parfois à des débats très houleux entre partis politiques et au fond entre niveaux de gouvernement. Merci pour votre question.
Très bien. And I rest my case about the importance of comparison. You know, it's by going to Brazil that you have this eureka moment to actually understand other systems. If there's one value in the kind of work that we're trying to do, it's partly that as well. Thinking outside the box, thinking outside our structures, and when we can move again, the value of serendipity sometimes in the research we do. Time is flying, time is precious. I would like to just ask you to join me before I give the floor to Colin, to Robert. Open your mics if you can, open your cameras if you can, so we could just congratulate our 4 winners and for these presentations. I'm thrilled. I'm very grateful to you. So.
Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup. And we will also ask you at some point to keep your cameras open. So if you don't mind, for those of you who can, we will take screenshots. Catherine will take screenshots so we have a memory of this collective moment. But now let me ask Colin to take it over, then Robert. And then, as I said, we will stay behind for those of you who just want to hang out. So I can't remember what the line was. Federalism is for, it wasn't losers, but it was something like that. Well, not necessarily. It will be also for passionates. Okay. Voila, Colin, please.
Thank you, Joanne. Actually, I'm going to ask you not to go there because I had remarks prepared for each of Philip, Benoît, Kelty, and Josiah, but because of the time, I think I will only pass on Josiah's mention. I think it was a UCLA professor, you said, wrote something, Federalism is for suckers, I believe was the title. I took a note of it. And I think this symposium proves that that's not at all the case. Federalism is for thinkers. And I'd like to congratulate all 4 of you, and indeed all of the people that submitted work. It's of a very high quality, and we are thrilled and honored, really, to be behind this. With the time remaining, I just want to thank Joanne Poirier, distinguished professor of law, Peter McKell. She has shepherded this competition from its infancy, and I mean infancy. She has now expanded it, and we saw the benefit of expanding it to political scientists in the lectures today. She is also an alumnus of a very distinguished class of McGill Faculty of Law 1990. And I'd like to congratulate my classmate, Joanne Poirier. Catherine Lapierre, very well named, Le Grand Manitou. You have worked tirelessly over the course of the last 2 years. Every detail is taken care of. We have to do virtually nothing. And I am sure you will have a bright future in whatever domain you choose after law. Should you want to go into civil and commercial litigation, I hope you give me a call. Dean Robert Leckie, finally, and the Faculty of Law at McGill, thank you so much. This competition in our submission reflects the very best of the national program at McGill. It encourages great young minds to think about these important issues, and hopefully it forms the next generation of leaders and lawyers. So thank you all. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Colin. Vraiment. Et Robert?
Merci beaucoup. Je suis honoré de prendre la parole très brièvement. Je félicite les récipiendaires des prix et je tiens à souligner la vision et la générosité du couple fondateur du concours, nos diplômés Rachel et Colin Baxter. Leur intérêt pour le fédéralisme s'est concrétisé par la création de ce concours et ils ont su habilement convaincre certains de leurs proches de se joindre à eux dans la poursuite de cet objectif. Ils sont de très fidèles amis de la faculté de droit. Rachel a par ailleurs été membre de notre conseil consultatif et je le remercie chaleureusement. Je suis Colin en soulignant également l'excellent travail de Joanne Poirier, titulaire de la chaire Peter McKell, ainsi que son assistante Catherine Lapierre. La petite équipe qui épaule la chaire Peter McKell et la tenue du concours Baxter se compose toujours d'étudiantes et d'étudiants du plus haut calibre. Je suis aussi reconnaissant aux membres distingués du jury international d'avoir accepté de nous aider. Ces 8 personnes ont apporté une expertise et une expérience extraordinaires et je les en remercie. On est heureux que le professeur Francesco Palermo de l'Université de Vérone se soit joint à nous aujourd'hui, ainsi que le professeur Nico Steitler, professeur à la faculté de droit de l'University of the Western Cape. I'm really proud as Dean that Rachel and Colin Baxter brought their idea of an international scholarly contest in federalism to their alma mater. McGill's Faculty of Law has, of course, a long and rich history of thought leadership in federalism. I note in passing that on January 1st, we welcomed a new colleague, Professor Alicia Hinarejos, formerly of Cambridge University, who's a world-renowned expert in European law, and her expertise complements Professor Poirier's. Of course, current events underscore the abiding importance of studying federalism, conceived broadly, and reflecting deeply on it, as if we needed any reminder. You might think about Brexit or the push for another Scottish referendum, or much closer to home, about the questions raised by this week's Bill 96, tabled in the National Assembly of Quebec, and its effort to inscribe the national character of the province and French as its official language in the Constitution Act 1867. Those of us who care about federalism, and if you're spending your Saturday on a Zoom with us today, I think I count you in that group, we may have a duty to educate, if gently, some of the others around us. I think, among others, of a journalist of the Globe and Mail who dismissively characterized the questions raised by the intended amendment of the 1867 Act as potentially giving rise, at most, to a bun fight between Ottawa and Quebec. We look forward to hosting you again in person in the near future at the McGill Faculty of Law. Thank you and bravo.
Merci beaucoup, Robert Miigwech. I think there are people here I would really like to acknowledge. I've thanked people before. Again, this is such a thrill. I mean, this is like candy for a teacher to be able to carry a project like this with people who are so talented and so dedicated. So thank you for joining us. Thank you again for the jury. I see names. I will just be like Joseph Marco, who spends a Saturday with us. Joseph, who is a world expert on post-conflict resolution. I see Asha Kaushal, who won the very first edition. Asha, wonderful to have you with us. But time is flying, so we will actually interrupt. I will say thank you again. And please, those of you who are still passionate enough, just hang out and we'll have an informal chat, carry on discussion and conversation and questions. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. And see you in 2 years.
Merci à tous. Thank you very much. Au revoir.
Thank you and congratulations.
Grazie, Francesco.
Thanks.
Oh, we didn't take the picture, or did you, Catherine? Did you manage? Yes, she's fantastic. Excellent. Wonderful. Okay. So there's still a few of us, and I know that some people had questions they didn't manage to ask, so maybe we can just start from there. I think Nico had a question, but maybe someone else before? If not, Nico, do you want to take it?
Oh, okay, a question to Kelly on trying to link your views on a plural constitutionality with federalism. And usually federalism is very much territorially based, whilst, and so my question is really, what are the federal principles that you can use when you also deal with non-federal based individuals from a community? How does it fit in, and what can you really learn taking this project of dual basis for constitutional law forward?
Thank you so much for your question. So the principles, I mean, I think principles of cooperative federalism, but one of the terms that I've learned from Dr. Boros is treaty federalism as a concept that can help us think about you know, our federal structure as a confederacy, in a sense, of nations. And, you know, I think you said that we think of federalism as sectorially based. Is that what you said?
Territorially.
So territorially based, yes, thank you. And I think that is definitely the unique challenge, because we're talking about land when we're talking about Indigenous legal orders and jurisdictions. And that, of course, is the question that Canada wants to avoid, or the provinces in many ways want to avoid. You know, we have this federal structure of, in the sort of like within thinking about like the Canadian federal structure, we have this idea of like the federal enclaves within the provinces, within Section 9124 of the Constitution, that is a legacy of the early relationship between the British and French and Indigenous peoples. And that has been eroding over time as, you know, as the provinces sort of gain more jurisdictional power and more power over the lives of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous lands. So, so I think what I'm proposing is thinking about it in a very different way, thinking about how Indigenous legal orders and provincial laws and federal laws are interacting across the same space. Like, it challenges us to think about law as more than just the law in force of a jurisdiction. I'm actually like thinking about Justice Kazir of the Supreme Court's writing, in his writing on transsystemic theory, and thinking about law as, you know, the cosmos of law, like not only as an imperial sort of territorial idea that we train as lawyers and then implement the law of a jurisdiction technically, but that we think of it as like intellectual traditions and that can inform each other, where, you know, civil law can inform common law, Indigenous legal traditions can inform common law. So anyways, those are some of my thoughts in response to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. Anyone else? Nico, if I can just sort of take it from there, because I can understand what your interested concern is. One of the challenges in doing this in Canada, and Jeremy Weber is an expert on this, is that you can deal with Indigenous legal orders as you might other type of non-territorialized legal orders, you know, it's taking about personal status in other systems and so on, because so much of the reality is land-based and grounded in territory, not necessarily in possession, not necessarily in exclusivity, but taking the territory out of the equation is like taking the life out of the culture and out of the nation. So you need to rethink sharing in a way that, frankly, is mind-boggling. It's quite radical. But I'm sure that there are thinkers outside who've been facing these issues, and maybe you can enlighten us as well about the.
Well, it's the question, obviously, it's very practice that you take your personal law from religion or whatever community that you belong to, and that carries with you. So that is simply recognized, and I think your example would be, or your critique is very valid, but it's in terms of the national law recognizing that you could carry own personal law based on religion, and that it must conform with the Bill of Rights, whatever. So yeah, you're much more radical and say, well, can this autochthonous legal order also carry off land? And I think in your paper, which is really, I must compliment you on a really excellent paper, said, well, the reality is that most, or not, or, a large section of people are not living, Indigenous communities not living on the territorial, on the land.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I wonder if I could join this conversation, Joanne. I think there's a kind of another aspect that underlies the exchange we just heard between Professor Stadler and Kelty. One dimension is the territorial versus personalized conceptions of federalism. But I think another implication of Kelty's amazing paper is, as theorists of federalism, we have tended to treat the idea that the system has to be organized in a comprehensive and consistent manner as the regulatory ideal that guides our discussions about federal structures. Yet if we think about it, that's a regulatory ideal that is never realized in reality, right? The very fact that we have these arguments over how a federal order ought to be interpreted, and those are in many ways the lifeblood of a federal order, suggests that that regulatory ideal, while it might shape our discourse, isn't essential to the operation of those orders in practice. And I think one of the things that Kelty is inviting us to do is to release that regulatory ideal. What happens if we let go of it in our theorizing or interpretations of federal orders? Are there other resources that can allow us to work within a structure that doesn't seek to provide single, coherent, comprehensive pictures at any point of a federal order? And what would our federal theorizing look like if we let go of that regulatory ideal? And it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge and a fascinating challenge.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And I'd really like to just say something very briefly in response to that. But what just comes up for me as you're talking, but what other resources? Well, I think what it does is it forces us to be in deep relationship with each other. And it's what, I've read Dr. Napoleon talking about deep democracy, like the deep democracy of Indigenous legal traditions, where these discursive and persuasive forms of governance are enacted between people all the time, and everyone is a legal agent. So we don't sort of abdicate our responsibility to this idealistic structure. We actually have to do the work all the time, and it's a learning. Yeah.
We're talking on so many different planes, and for me it's hugely challenging and very exciting, because you want to take this and then bringing back to Philippe and Josiah's articulation of how do you actually solve urgent issues, including in Indigenous communities, but everywhere, with you know, the state is back. I mean, if there's one thing we've learned over the last year and a half, is the state was dismissed and the state is back. And it's back, whether it's federal or not federal, whether it's alone or not alone, but the state is back. Now, when I say the state, does it have to be the state as we've understood it in a very imperialistic way for 300 years, or can it be more inclusive and pluralistic? So I don't know, but I mean, I can see why we're sort of moving from one to the other, and how interdependency, the way Benoît brings it in a more sort of structured, technical way, is also part of that picture. But it is very provocative to think about these legal orders that are not all-inclusive, that are not exhaustive, that are not, you know, it's you or me, or who's got the power, who's got the land, who's got the, you know, and I can tell you, for me, that's been a real issue. I've been a Quebec nationalist for my life. I mean, about competencies and autonomy has been really important, you know, and to let go of that is actually really interesting, really thought-provoking. Yeah. Okay. Any other reaction? Good. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for staying with us, Josiah and Nico, and those of you in Europe. It's late and it's a Saturday. So thank you. Take the word forward. We'll look forward to the publications of your pieces. Clearly, they all deserve to be published. And I should say, I will just close with a word I got from Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin this morning when she announced that she couldn't make it, and she really was disappointed because she was on till last night. She said that she found these manuscripts of immense quality, and frankly, even the ranking was sometimes difficult, was challenging, because they, as you could see today, they are so different and so rich. So you should be very, very proud, and go ahead, publish and carry on teaching us. Thank you very, very much. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir. And we'll be in touch about, you'll be getting, the 4 winners, you'll be getting a lovely certificate, both in PDF and eventually in the slow mail, which we normally would have given to you, but it will come with your prize. Okay. Merci encore. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Congratulations, everybody.
Bye.
Merci.
Thank you.